But so obviously the controversy there is that Baker clearly told Gorbachev not 1 inch, and that was the basis upon which Gorbachev said, okay, fine, let's make a deal then, and he agreed to pull his troops out of Germany. But the deal they signed doesn't say that, and it doesn't say, and of course they ended up saying, well, that kind of doesn't make sense. We got to be able to expand NATO's presence inside Germany, but then the discrepancy is over whether the Russians understood that we promised not to expand any further east than that was the basis of their negotiating everything else that they did. And so, the technicalitarians will say, as Peter Baker in the New York Times, well, it doesn't say that in a treaty. They used to deny that it was promised at all, but then George Washington University National Security Archive put up all the documents for everybody to read. It's like, okay, well, it's in writing, but it's not in an actual deal. But so you're professing firsthand knowledge of this. I was wondering if you could help to, explain the nuance here and whether the Russians really had a deal or whether they didn't.
Look, I think the deal was there. I think Gorbachev should have gotten it in writing. It would have helped a lot. But there's no question that the meaning of not 1 inch eastward wasn't within the GDR, wasn't within East Germany, because there were many, many statements, not just about Germany, but about moving eastward towards the Soviet Union into Central and Eastern Europe, and basically not taking advantage of the unilateral gesture or the unilateral action of Gorbachev, who was a man of peace, very rare. And, in this prisoner's dilemma game, where peace on both sides is a lot better than war on both sides, the argument is, well, if you're soft, the other side takes advantage of you. And the Soviet side was, quote, soft. And if you're a profound and deep cynic, you say, okay, yeah, great, what a sucker this guy was. If you're actually out for peace and for the world, you say, God, did we really have to wreck this once-in-a-century opportunity to build a safer world? Because that's exactly what we did. We lawyered up, we played with words, we hid the discussions, we phonied it up, and here's where we are. So, many scholars and historians point out lots of international agreements are verbal commitments. Those are clear. We thank George Washington University for those archives because they're really good and very, very helpful. They make very clear the meaning of these terms. But Gorbachev should have gotten it in writing.
Yeah, well, they would have just tore that up too.
Yeah.
The way they tore up the ABM treaty and whatever else is in their way. But now, okay, so you told Tulsi Gabbard on her show that you had gone to Ukraine just after the coup in 2014, and the NGOs were showing you around and bragging about how they had helped overthrow the government there. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on that anecdote a little bit.
Yeah, I was asked by the new government, come and talk to us about our financial crisis and financial situation. That's what I do as a professor. So if a government calls, I generally try to go. So I went to meet the new Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, and the Maidan was still filled with the protesters, and there were Americans all around. And I had a couple of hours before my meeting, and they showed me around. They explained, yeah, we were all out there. We made this great demonstrations. We helped them. We supported them. We financed this. We financed that. All completely consistent with what we know. We don't know all the story, but we know that that Victoria Nuland was basically camping out in Kiev those weeks, helping to steer what became a violent insurrection against the government. And God, I hated what I saw, because I wouldn't like on January 6th to find out that, yeah, the the enthusiasm and the money had come from lots of foreign powers that said go storm the Capitol. We'd feel great about that, wouldn't we? But that's exactly what we did.
Yeah. So, I think you probably won't want to name first and last names of individual people, but can you name some organizations that we're talking about here?
I probably don't want to right now, but it's they know. Some of them have bragged about it. It's pretty unpleasant. I actually believe, as a general matter, by the way, that the National Endowment for Democracy should be shut down as an institution dangerous to the well-being of the American people. So that's not what I experienced in that instant, but it's a more general observation. We should not be meddling in the internal politics, the mechanics of party politics, of elections, the way we do relentlessly in a lot of places. It's bad news for us, very dangerous. We hate it when anyone comes miles close to what we do, right up to right up to the vote, and we should stop doing it. We made institutions that are designed to meddle deeply and in a completely non-transparent way in politics of other countries, and we should stop that.
You know what? Let me ask you this. I'm sorry, because it's kind of a straw man thing, but I see it all the time. It's kind of a talking point of the other side, which is you're just denying the will of the people of the Maidan or the people of the Rose Revolution or whatever. All of these people wish that their country could change, and we came and helped them a little bit, and now you're denying their agency by giving all the credit to the CIA because you live in conspiracy world or something like that.
Look, their business is their business. My business is what our government is doing, and that's what I'm talking about right now. We should not have been there. Our politicians should not have been there. We should not have been funding this, what turned into this open uprising, period. So, it's not denying any agency of anyone else. It's denying what our role of irresponsibility is. We should take care and stay away from this kind of meddling. And, if you've seen the world as I've seen some of these very unfortunate things, I don't like American-led insurrections or even American participation in insurrections. I don't like the covert operations like we talked about in Syria, which was a presidential order, actually, to the CIA to overthrow Assad. No, I don't like that. That's a terrible idea. And basically, we know historians have produced long lists of dozens and dozens of regime change operations. My belief about foreign policy is you deal with another government with diplomacy, with negotiation, with many things, but you don't make foreign policy based on overthrowing other governments. And if we followed that basic idea that foreign policy is about diplomacy, it's not about regime change, we would have spared millions of lives and trillions of wasted dollars in the U.S. because we got hooked on regime change a long time ago, already going back to the 1950s. And it's been a disaster for the United States, a disaster, not to mention a disaster for the other countries.
Okay, so let's go back to 2008. You say you talked with leaders from the European Union about the Bucharest Declaration at the time. You mentioned that. I was just wondering if you could give us any more specific anecdotes there about French, German positions that they held, who it was, what exactly they said to you at the time.
It wasn't the French or the Germans, so I can say that. I won't say more than that, except to say that European leaders were really unhappy with Bush, because Bush had basically told them, as I understand it, we're not going to do that. Went off to Christmas holidays apparently came back and said, okay, now we're enlarging to Ukraine and to Georgia. And they were really unhappy. A lot of that unhappiness was shown publicly because Sarkozy and Merkel said, no, we're not going to put a path to membership. But Bush forced the final declaration to say that NATO will enlarge to Ukraine and to Georgia. Not maybe, not someday, but just will enlarge to Ukraine and to Georgia. And by the way, just anecdotally, soon after that, the Georgian leader, Saakashvili, came to New York on a quick tour of the U.S., and I went to hear him at the Council on Foreign Relations. I couldn't believe what I was hearing because the guy was saying, we're going to join NATO, we're in the center of Europe, and the Americans in the room, yeah, we're with you 100%. And I walked out of there shaking. This is crazy. This guy's going to get his head handed to him. And it wasn't just a few weeks later that Russia and Georgia were at war, and he got his head handed to him. These countries also need some prudence. They need to know, if you're Georgia, campaigning for NATO membership as a country in the Caucasus, not smart, not prudent. The Ukrainians should have understood that to invite this proxy war on their soil is first and foremost the massive disaster for their country. But we also shouldn't entice them into this. And we're, pretty convincing. You put your arm around them, we got your back, we're with you, we love you, until we don't. And how many times have we walked away from, and we'll walk away from this also, most likely in a horrible way, but I don't want us to walk away. I want us to settle this through negotiation, just to be clear. But these countries also need prudence. They need to understand, don't get yourself trapped in a proxy war.